Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality and clinical practice. I'm your host, Doc Bach, and I am here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we'll be talking about personality darkness, and specifically personalities that kill. Given the rise of violence in our culture and recent events, we thought the discussion of personality and crime is both timely and necessary. A lot of us wonder, what makes a person snap that they resort to murder, attempted murder, or otherwise horrific crimes? While humans are complex and each person is unique in their psyche and behavior, personality typologies do help us categorize behavioral patterns. Some personality traits correlate more closely with crime, and some personality types are more likely to resort to extreme behavior and violence. So let's draw on our knowledge of personality to try to create understanding from chaos. So let's first look broadly at research and what we know. Okay, I'll start. So what we know about mental illness is that those with mental health conditions are more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators. But with personality, what we're getting at here is that any personality is capable of harming others, and of really disintegrating or falling apart. But as we said earlier, there are some personalities that are more prone to this violence than other people. So I also want to, before we get to the specific personality types and start unpacking those and their risk, I want us to make sure to talk about two really important research studies from history that have taught us so much about how far we can go and how vile we can be as humans, because I think it's important to note that in the context that we are all capable of vile and horrific things.
Right. Milgram study. So Stanley Milgram was a psychologist at Yale. In 1963, he actually did an experiment that focused on individual conscious versus obedience to authority. So if you can guess, that was based on his interest of the horrendous crimes committed in World War II. His research question was essentially, how much harm will someone do to another person if instructed to?
Yikes.
Now, all his participants were males aged 20 to 50. Basically, participants came in, they told that they were going to be a teacher. They were going to teach this stranger who was actually part of the study, but they didn't know it, some words. And every time the stranger got an answer incorrect, they were supposed to administer a shock. They had a visual. So the shock went from a slight shock to dangerous shock.
Wow.
And every time there was an incorrect answer, it went up. The intensity of the shock went up. And while they didn't get to see the stranger react to the shocks, they heard the stranger react to the shocks. So they had sounds of pain. At some point, I believe the stranger mentioned he had a heart condition. But the conclusion is that 65% of people went to the highest level of shock, which was 450 volts.
Holy cow.
Which is, that's sad. Honestly, it's scary. But then all people, so all participants, went up to 300 volts.
That's a lot, because it doesn't take a whole lot of voltage for there to be damaging impacts. Right. But because they were instructed to keep administering shocks regardless of the pain that they were hearing, they kept going because an authority told them to do so.
Right.
Which gives us some clues perhaps about how so many people got swept up into the horrific acts of World War II following an authority.
There's another study, though.
Yeah, so this one came in 1971. This was Zimbardo's Stanford's prison experiment. And this one was also pretty well known. But Zimbardo wanted to understand if prison guards were characteristically sadistic or harmful to others, or if the environment of the prison made them that way. So he gathered 24 men and randomly assigned them as prisoner or guard. So the outcome was that the men that were assigned as guards, some of whom, interestingly, were pacifists, became sadistic towards the prisoners. So prisoners became masochistic and allowed themselves to be treated this way and essentially to be dehumanized because they blindly obeyed authority.
Wow.
Yeah. And Zimbardo himself was a part of the study. He was the superintendent. He became a rigid authoritarian leader in the process. And the behavior got so out of hand, it was so bad, that they had to end the study in 6 days because it was no longer safe.
If I remember correctly, too, Zimbardo got swept up in it. So he wasn't going to end the study, but one of his coworkers came in, saw how horrific it was, told him, like, it's changing who he is.
Oof.
And she didn't like who he was becoming. He took some convincing to end the study.
Wow, because he got sucked into that environment.
And a major piece of this, too, is like, they could have left. Anyone, the prisoners, the guards, like they could have left the study at any time.
Yeah. So the conclusion then, unsurprisingly, is that situational factors, or what some people might call this like group think, where everyone starts to have the same ideas, and the overall environment was a stronger undertow than personality alone, leading to sadistic behavior. Like another example of how we can kind of blindly follow authority and do horrible things. And when the environment is right, with the right ingredients, we can get swept up in it. But what about these structures and these personalities that are more prone to destruction? Doc Fish, do you want to kick us off with cluster A from the DSM?
Sure do.
All right, here we go.
Cluster A, we have schizoid first. If you remember, schizoids are going to be more reserved. They're going to keep to themselves. They might be seen as a loner. They have a low need for socialization, but overall they're harmless. So they're at low risk. They'd rather stay to themselves, be separated from society, observe the world from afar, stay in their own corner. They're not afraid of the world, though, like paranoid would be. The world's just too much. This type cocoons, or I like turtles. They're like a turtle. So if they're threatened, they'll withdraw into their shell. Now, if you go into their shell, they might snap at you, but they're not going to come after you. Turtles, right? Like if you walk by them, they'll probably just jump back in the water. If you pass by, like they're just content swimming. Yeah. You might see a head somewhere popped up in the water. But like that, you're not going to be afraid that a turtle's going to get you. And we're not talking about like the scary snapping turtles that look like dinosaurs. We're talking about box turtles or other docile turtles. That's what a schizoid reminds me of.
Sure. So when we hear the term for like individuals who create mass carnage or harm other people, when we hear the word lone wolf, schizoid is not necessarily, most likely not going to be the character structure of these types.
Right. They're going to be like the lone turtle. So they're going to have that lone part, but they're just not threatening. Yeah. They're not going to harm.
They're a lone turtle. The lone wolf is yet to come.
Yes.
We'll talk about that, kind of the snake in the grass type that can carry a lot of the same characteristics as schizoid, because within each cluster, the DSM categorizes things in cluster. There's going to be overlap. But someone who's just withdrawn to themselves, more turtle-like, they don't want to hurt anyone. The world's just overwhelming. It's too much. They're very low risk.
Similarly, there's schizotypal. So some theorists actually say that schizotypal is lumped in with schizoid. So they separate like schizotypy as a behavioral trait that's common in schizoids, but the DSM actually categorizes it as a different personality structure. So schizotypals, they might be odd, eccentric, uncomfortable, and especially socially. They might have some magical thinking that's benign. So magical thinking might be, it's like connecting two things that really aren't connected. So like the crickets are saying my name. There's not full-blown delusions or hallucinations. And honestly, harming someone for them would take too much effort. They don't have the energy. They'd rather just keep to themselves. Now, if threatened, they're going to react much like a schizoid does. But because of the difference of their tendency to toe the line between like reality and unreality, they might snap at you more quickly or even harder. But they're still going to be fairly docile and harmless types.
Okay. So this is another low risk one. And what would still within the low risk range, but what might elevate them just a little bit above schizoid is because they straddle that line between reality and non-reality.
Yes.
And then if they disintegrate further into, not being in touch with reality at all, then that puts them at a higher risk, but still generally low risk for this type. Yeah.
Right. Because even if they disintegrate, they're going to be scared and they're still going to want to hide. But if you get in their face, right, they're going to snap at you because they want to protect themselves like most human beings would.
This is not the type that's going to create mass carnage, not going to go on a killing spree, barring the fact that we are all capable of horrible, horrible things.
Correct. Okay, so we did 2 low-risk ones, but then there's one more in cluster A. What is that?
Oh, yeah. Here's where we bump up the risk, and that's with paranoid. Paranoid is a totally different structure that is considered high risk. And there's multiple different iterations or subtypes of paranoid, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But generally, paranoid types are overall very suspicious, distrustful of others. They have this view that the world is full of threats that are aimed at them. So the world is on fire, but they're also kind of sitting in a victim stance that everyone's against me, or I should say vindictive, kind of get back at the world for wronging me or harming me in some type of way. Viewing the world as on fire. I've got to defend myself.
Dangerous.
Yes. Paranoid types can look more schizoid or skis because they can keep to themselves. They can be more withdrawn. They can be kind of the lone wolf type. But the difference here is that you never really know a paranoid. You never really know them because they show so many different faces and facets of themselves to different people depending on the situation, because they don't trust anyone. So they're not going to show you their true story, their true self. They'll give you nuggets, and they really don't want to be seen. They're unlikely to seek treatment or help, which further isolates them, which creates an even higher risk, given this kind of vindictiveness that they can carry with them. It's interesting because in psychological testing, when we've had paranoid cases, it often feels like we're on a wild goose chase with the data. Where it's not lining up. I like to say the data doesn't lie, but people do. So if the data is not lining up as it should, like we've done hundreds of evaluations and used the same types of measures. And if it's not lining up, something's up. And it sometimes has felt like a chase, like a come chase me for the truth. Come chase me. It's your job to figure out which nuggets are true, which aren't, or maybe I'm just not going to tell you. And I'm going to present all these different facets thinking that that's really who I am. But I can imagine that would be a similar experience for those who are kind of maybe profiling an individual with paranoid, like post-crime, looking at the crime scene, like the pieces don't make sense, that doesn't add up. You have things that are dichotomous, things that are opposite, or maybe profiling the individual where it's like, that doesn't add up over here, or this doesn't add up over here. I don't feel like I really know the person. There's probably a high likelihood that there's a paranoid structure somewhere in the personality gobstopper, if not at the core. As far as risk for harming others, I kind of alluded to this, but they're at a high risk for destroying others and then themselves. So because of that, murder-suicide is common. The biggest defense mechanism with paranoid types is projection. So they want to project onto the world all of this pain and this anger because they feel like they've been wronged and they don't want to hold it anymore. So they're going to put it onto you or onto the masses in perhaps like a mass carnage situation, and then take their own life so that they're not placed in the victim role. They've expelled all of their pain and they're going to end their life without that pain. That's deep and tragic.
It is. And it's that transfer of pain too, because we all can project a little, but like actually transferring the pain, like I can't hold it, you hold it.
Exactly.
That's risky. That's dangerous.
Yeah. And it's not uncommon for them to kind of go out dramatically as well, because if you're projecting or transferring your pain to someone else, you hold it, there's going to be a trauma in that. There's no way that can't be dramatic. It's not oh, here, hold my bag. No.
Right.
Hold my pain means drama, a lot of really unpredictable behavior, unsafe behavior, most likely. I would guess a lot of mass murderers are paranoid structures.
Makes sense.
Yeah, there's a few others that it can be, but this is one of them where, I would give that a high likelihood.
Especially, I think, if the individual victims are chosen to versus the victims being unknowns.
They're chosen to hold the pain specifically. Paranoids, I will say, they can also look a bit more borderline, which we're going to talk about in a minute, because they can feel really fragile when you sit with them sometimes, depending on which side they show. So they're going to run that line between victim and persecutor, but they can sit in this feel sorry for me, handle me with kid gloves. And as a result, they can be diagnosed with a bunch of different things because you never really know them.
I was just thinking they probably don't even know themselves.
Yes.
There's a couple of different subtypes that I wanted to talk about with paranoids.
Yes.
And this comes from Milan. So there's a ton of them, but only a couple I want to talk about. Okay. I might say this wrong, but Querulously paranoid individuals, they're going to be known for their overt hostility and delusions, including erotic delusions. So that could even include like stalking.
Oh.
Yeah. But also with that, they demand protection and then they might project. So they get it backwards, right? They want protection from these people who are innocent, but they're not innocent. They switch it.
It's like, I hate to use this example, but this is what I think of with it. Like when it's projection. So when someone passes gas and they look across the table and they're like, you did that. And it's like, oh no, that smell is coming from you, not the other person. That's from you. That's what they're doing, right?
Basically. Yeah. But not only are they doing that, but they're like, you did it on purpose. You wanted me to be in this discomfort. These subtypes might become stalkers. So then it's possible that they're going to kill either for whatever they're infatuated with or kill the object of their infatuation.
Oh, yikes.
Right? So not, of course, not all, but it's a risk. It's high risk.
Yeah.
Now, oppositely, I think it's important to highlight one that is actually more prone to commit suicide than to murder. So the insular paranoid, they're going to withdraw, become isolated. In their isolation, they're going to become more and more out of touch with reality. And they have a need to protect themselves and a high fear of being controlled. So they're going to lash out like a paranoid would, but eventually their inner world is going to become so threatening that they're going to try to escape it. Now, not always suicide, right? But they're more prone to numbing. So substance, like they need to escape their inner world. And if it's too threatening, they might end it.
Wow. So these types maybe look a little bit more schizoid in their withdrawal, but
Sure.
But they're not. They're much more volatile, at least on the inside, if they're not going to act out towards others.
Right. So even so, like they're not going to be a turtle, because if you walk by them, they're still going to snap at you, even though you're not a threat. Like a turtle's going to jump in the water. They're going to run. This kind of paranoid is going to be like, you did this on purpose. You are attacking me. I'm going to attack you first. But they're not going to go out and kill. So let's see. The other one I wanted to talk about is the malignant paraphrenic. I know. So that personality is a decompensated, or like it's a sadistic personality that has fallen apart, is out of touch with reality. So they're gonna probably show up in hospitals, if not jails, being like not guilty due to reasons of insanity. They're dangerous. They're not in reality, and they have a need to lash out like a paranoid, and that's paired with finding pleasure in other people's suffering. All of that together is why paranoid is at high risk.
Absolutely. And the sadistic piece of that last one, that malignant paraphrenic, that's really concerning. Like if you have a personality that finds pleasure in watching others suffer or hurting others at any degree that a person has that trait, yikes, look out. Oh, shall we move to the cluster Bs?
Yes, let's do cluster B.
Okay, let's kick that off with borderline. So borderline, unfortunately, is really sensationalized in the media. And there are movies or TV shows or things out there that depict what they call a borderline or borderline personality disorder character who is murderous. And that is really unlikely to be the case. The thing that makes borderline individuals medium risk here is their impulsivity. So someone with borderline is hurting deeply. They typically don't want to hurt anyone else. They just want the world to see their pain. They don't necessarily want to transfer it onto other people unless they feel rejected or abandoned, which is their hair trigger. Then that can lead to lashing out or, saying things to someone. But most likely, if something were to happen, it would be an impulsive fit of rage, and then remorse would follow.
Yeah.
Or it would be really dramatic language, like, I want to kill him. I can't believe he cheated on me. But nothing's going to come of it.
Right. They don't actually mean it.
Yeah. Yeah. But because impulsivity is high in this type, that makes them that medium risk, because there's volatility in impulsivity. When you don't know what someone's next move is, And because borderline structures move, so there's instability in moods, in relationships, and in sense of self, in all of that. So behavior is also going to follow that instability. There's highs, there's lows, there's ups, there's downs. I love you, I hate you. And then within this personality structure is movement. So the name borderline essentially is a movement of disintegration. So from neurotic to borderline to psychotic. So when we get into that place of like stepping out of reality for a minute, or kind of backsliding into that place, we can see some paranoia or delusions. Maybe they feel like they need to protect themselves from someone, but it's not persistent as in paranoid. Yes. It's not going to be premeditated murder, most likely.
Right. But the impulsivity isn't necessarily the premeditation.
Right. It's not premeditated. That's kind of goes against what impulsivity is.
I was thinking while you were describing this, because we went with that turtle, and like, I wonder, whatever animal borderline is, if you walk by them, they're going to throw a fit if you don't pet them and love them. And they're going to be really sad when you leave. And because they're sad, they might actually hurt themselves because they want your attention, or because they know it's going to hurt you. So their pain is usually on themselves and the harm to themselves, not projected onto others.
Right. They're more likely to harm themselves to like hurt the other person.
Which isn't helpful regardless, but it's still probably not going to be premeditated murder, or like a horror film where the impulsive murder lasts for like 2 hours. That's not it. That's not borderline. Histrionic.
Yeah.
Okay. Histrionic. They're low risk. They're shallower with their emotions. Their fear of overstimulation is a fear from inner overstimulation. So too much feelings, they don't like it. So that's why it's like their feelings on the outside are theatrical and they can be shallow. If you remember, this one as an ice cream would be like Pop Rocks, sprinkles, cotton candy. They just want attention and they don't necessarily want to inflict pain. So they don't have deep convictions that require any emotional commitment and depth. They're not interested in the negative attention that like a murderer would get. They might have more masochistic traits and maybe put themselves in harm's way. But my only thought is like, if they were to kill someone, it was either like maybe an accident because they set off a glitter bomb. Like they are just flamboyant and happy and histrionic.
Yeah. If they hurt someone, it would be from a glitter bomb. That's funny.
Yes.
Yeah. They would be the type that like after a crime is committed, they would be taking, hyperbolically speaking, taking to the streets in their nightgown. Oh my word, can you believe it? Going door to door in the dramatic way. But they're not going to be involved in the crime. Yes. They're going to be the one that's like sounding the alarm in dramatic language so that someone comes and fixes the situation.
Mm-hmm. So don't be worried about any histrionics. In contrast, we have narcissistic. What are your thoughts about narcissistic?
Narcissistic is tricky because narcissism is a trait. Mm-hmm. And with any malignant personality, you're going to have high narcissism. So that trait in and of itself is I believe, part of the dark triad as well. So when there is such extreme self-absorption and lack of empathy, like that's kind of your first ingredient. And then once you start adding in other stuff, it can really make for a really vile and dark personality. So it depends on the type of narcissistic structure. So as we probably remember, narcissistic structures are more self-absorbed, image-based. Everyone and everything is in orbit around their ego, obsessed with their image, kind of the Gaston from Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
They want to make sure their image is portrayed to the public a certain way and stop at nothing to make sure that it's exactly as they want it. They need admiration, to be elevated above others. They can have like grandiose or larger than life ideas with their speech or with their, their career goals, wanting to be at the top, to have the power, or the best, greatest, prettiest of them all, like whatever their grandiose goal is the plan, is their kind of what they're working towards and want applause for. But risk-wise, because it can vary a lot, they're in the medium to high risk category, depending on what type of narcissism it is. Narcissistic structure. So I'm hoping you can help me tease that apart, Doc Fish.
Right. Because I think that some narcissists are more concerned about image rather than destruction.
Right.
But then others are very much more about power, which then leads to destruction.
Ooh.
Yes. So pulling from Alon's subtypes again, he labels an elitist narcissist, which he thinks is like a more pure version of narcissism. So they're over image-based. They might react with anger and hostility, but they're more focused on social climbing than actually inflicting harm.
Right. So and killing someone isn't going to help with the social climbing.
Not. No.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, they're probably still going to step on toes and maybe legs and heads to get up that social ladder, but they're not going to actually like focus on killing someone.
Right. They would kill someone's self-esteem.
Oh, yes. That's a great example. They kill someone's self-esteem, but not the actual physical body. Another one we have is exploitative. So they're deceptive. Milan says they have an indifferent conscience. So it's not lacking. They just don't care. They can be charming. They can engage in like fraud, lying, swindling. But again, they're not likely to destroy others physically. They're going to be a little bit more antisocial as far as like breaking rules and social norms in their social climbing, but they're not going to destroy others physically and like kill them.
Interesting. Yeah. And antisocial meaning going against societal norms, not someone who's withdrawn. We use that term incorrectly, kind of in colloquially. Antisocial is breaking rules, going against norms, not someone who's asocial or is more reserved. Not the same thing.
Yes. Thanks for highlighting that. That's important. The last one I want to talk about is the unprincipled narcissist. So this is a mix of narcissistic personalities and some antisocial traits, like antisocial personality traits. They're malicious. They're vengeful. They want to inflict humiliation, and they want to dominate others because they want the power, and they don't have any remorse. They have very little social conscience. So the risk for this one, the subtype specifically, is high. It's above the medium one. It's high. A little nugget, I guess, because I can't help it. The Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual, the 2nd edition, they have a malignant narcissistic type. And they noted that type is combined with sadistic aggression.
Yeah.
And so I think those kind of go together. It's like, it's the narcissist, it's a core narcissist, but they have an aggression in which they just want to harm others. They enjoy it.
Once we have that sadistic part that I want to hurt other people or I get some type of gratification from it, that's problematic.
Yes.
In any dose. Yikes. So this person is looking out for their image, their own best interest, or their own grandiosity. Might be more grandiosity than image as we think of it, but they're going to harm others in the process.
Now we keep using the word antisocial. So let's do antisocial next.
Right.
They're at high risk. And again, there's a difference between asocial, which is like withdrawing from people, not having interest in socialization, and antisocial, being against the social norms.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about antisocial?
Right. So these, as you said, there's a disregard for others' rights. There's constant violation of others' rights, or just your typical kind of social contracts that get us through life. There's violation of those things. They're non-conforming, even to the law. They break the law. They're deceptive. They also can be impulsive, aggressive, reckless. They can be sneaky and charming as well. It's where some of the narcissistic flavors come up with that charm, like, oh, look, it's shiny. But really, it's pretty destructive. So because of that, if you already have a personality base of going against society norms and what's socially acceptable, they don't necessarily care if they commit a crime because they're above the law, or this person wronged me, or whatever it is. But yeah, this is not a good base.
In a different episode, I think we described this as like a narcissist has on their costume at all time. They need to protect their image. Antisocial, they're going to have like 50 different costumes in their closet, and they're going to put on the one that is most useful for them in that moment. And they can switch between them. Because it's not about image. It's about the manipulation and putting themselves first and getting what they want. So Milan, he has a couple different ones. There's a couple who probably are going to run and be a little bit more towards that asocial. But then the ones that are more frightening, one he calls reputation defending. So again, that's a combination of like antisocial and narcissistic features. They're focused on their status, presenting themselves as powerful and tough. They might want a powerful position. They are most likely to engage in like violence or even terrorism that owe their strong sense of victimization and alienation.
Holy cow.
So like extremist groups or cultures they believe that like are their enemies, or like moral transgressors. Basically, they're justifying their violence in a way that gains power, but keeps the status. It keeps the leadership role. So it might look like really aggressive leadership, like violent leadership, or even like a turf war in gangs.
Ooh, yuck. So is it more so their desire for power and just using a group to be victimized to achieve that power? Is that what this is?
Yes, because you can't, I mean, I guess you could technically, but you can't really have power without other people, because who are you going to have power over?
Sure.
So they're going to be in those groups so that they can rise to power. And in keeping whoever is under them, they have to justify their violence, make sure that they're recruiting. They have to look powerful and tough.
Sure. I can see how this personality type would be common in gangs, like ringleaders or, like drug gangs.
Second type I wanted to talk about was malevolent. So they're going to be the like cold-blooded, ruthless, intense, vindictive, definitely destructive subtype.
Oof.
They're focused on revenge. No, it could be like revenge for either something that really happened or even an imagined or misinterpreted mistreatment. especially probably in childhood that they experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like they have a chip on their shoulder and they're revenge oriented.
Wow. So there's a paranoid flavor here.
They blend with paranoid and or sadistic.
Oh, so this is
right.
This is bad. This is pretty bad.
Yeah, the three biggest personality types that lead towards violence, right? Paranoid, sadistic, antisocial. This is a blend of all of them.
Great. So this is really a dangerous character type. This subtype of antisocial.
Yes. What's important about this type that I think differs from sadistic is that they can actually understand their guilt and they can understand remorse, at least cognitively, like in their brains they can. They might even experience it emotionally, but they're so revenge oriented that they just don't care.
Wow.
And then again, because I'm nerdy and I can't help it, pulling from the Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual, 2nd edition, under antisocial, they have two types. They have like a parasitic or a passive parasitic type, I think. That's going to be like a con artist, or I think they mentioned like a Ponzi scheme, the manipulator, the one that's behind the scenes, but they end up on top. Then they have an antisocial with an aggressive type.
Okay.
So we're talking about this aggressive type. Like they're out for blood and they'll probably take it.
Would you say that a psychopath would fall into this range?
Yes. Actually, psychodynamic, they call this the antisocial type psychopathic.
Okay.
Types.
There you go.
So
this is psychopath.
This is probably what we think of when we think psychopath.
Wow. Okay. I think there's another one that's not in the DSM, but is still really helpful. We've alluded to it.
I know. So yes, technically sadistic personality disorder is not in the DSM. It was considered at one point and rejected. But sadistic is separated out in psychodynamic theory, and then also Milan separates it out as well. So they're often going to be found in forensic settings rather than clinical settings. And the basis of their type is that they enjoy inflicting pain on others.
Oh my. This is like the Hannibal Lecter Silence of the Lambs type. Like Hannibal the cannibal, they call him.
There's just an enjoyment of pain. They want to inflict it.
They want to watch others suffer. They get something out of it.
Yes. Let's see. Milan has a couple subtypes, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to broadly go over some of them. So some sadists, they feel they have a right to control or punish others. And so they might maybe want to be the martyr by dehumanizing their victims. Some sadists are actually fearful, and so much so that they're violent to hide it. We call this counterphobic, or basically going against a fear.
Oh, interesting.
So again, you'll find these types of sadists probably in groups with a shared scapegoat, like a hate group, or basically in a group where they can share their anger, their displaced anger, because they need to put it somewhere.
Maybe where they oppress another people group or something.
Yep. Some sadists might kill in an uncontrollable rage, but it's not premeditated. They're most likely to kill the ones around them, closest to them, in this hair trigger, never know, it's unpredictable.
Oof.
The one that's most interesting for this setting and the one that's most severely cruel and honestly frightening is tyrannical sadist. They're going to attack, abuse, intimidate, destroy. Weakness encourages them to attack. So it's very much predator prey. So if you think of a wolf, for example, and they smell prey, if you run, they're going to smile and go after you. I believe in Milan, he actually used the word evil. So not all are going to kill, right? So some can be verbally sadistic using their words, but they can also, there's a lot that can physically hurt. They can have features of paranoid. They can lack mercy and be absolutely inhumane in their violence. But like I said, like this is almost like a game, right? Because they want to inflict their pain. So they're going to be like calculating, keep their cool. They're going to select their victim, somebody who's not going to like probably have like fight back.
Would this be like spree killers or serial killers?
That's what it makes me think of like the torture kill. Like hunt, torture, kill.
Oof.
No remorse. Milan says something to the extent where like there's nothing inside them that can break or constrain them until all of their fury or their rage is done. It's spent.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so these types of people exist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And likely in our history of murderous behavior, the structure has existed.
Gives you goosebumps.
It does. It does. Oh my word. We have one more set of clusters, a cluster C, to get through. Thankfully, we're out of the high risk territory, but there's still medium risk here. In cluster C, we have avoidant. So if you remember, avoidant is characterized by fear of criticism, kind of like an extreme social anxiety. These types generally want to please other people to avoid criticism. They can become bitter and more negative, sometimes even passive aggressive. Sometimes there can be impulsive anger. Some theorists would even say that they decompensate into paranoid. And in that case, that's where we get into more dangerous territory. If there's a decompensation where it's like the world is not safe, I don't trust anyone, then I'm going to take it out on somebody. So that's why we put this at a medium risk. Generally, they're not super high risk, but if there's disintegration happening in their personality, that can increase the risk for them. But yeah, most likely they're not going to want to be provoked. They will bite. Sometimes they might even bite if they're not provoked.
Right. If it's like a passive aggressive, it's a displaced bite.
Yeah. But
from 2 weeks ago.
Right. But this is not an antisocial or paranoid or sadistic pattern. No. And then we have dependent.
Okay.
Which is interesting. So dependent, we put at medium risk as well. So a dependent type can't really function on their own without someone else taking care of them or making decisions for them. They don't really function well on their own. So I actually put them at a medium risk, though, because, well, firstly, someone would have to offer to pull the trigger for them.
Yeah. Someone
else. They would not be the ones to do it because they can't function. But this type is the most likely to be an accomplice, either passive or active, because they're the most likely to be dating someone who committed the crime.
Interesting.
Yes, crying out, but I loved him, but I thought I could fix him. I suppose borderline might also fall into that category, but I think dependent more than borderline. So dependents are like a sheep following their shepherd unwittingly, to the point that they could end up doing things because they're not thinking for themselves. They tend to be more masochistic, so setting themselves up for failure, for hurt. Interestingly, though, like inherently, they're not necessarily vile or angry. They get swept up. They're easily swept up in something else. So if they did commit a crime or were an accomplice, they would serve time and probably get out on good behavior.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So again, if they're not hooked to a perpetrator in some type of way, they're not going to be the perpetrator on their own. But they're going to buddy up to a perpetrator, most likely in a romantic relationship.
Because they're going to be the type that's like, oh, I see the good in them.
I can fix them.
I can love them.
Yeah, and they'll take care of me.
Which also includes power. So they're attracted to someone with power.
Right. And this is where kind of the more masochistic structures and the sadistic structures, we're using different terms, but it's the same type of behavior. Like they can dance. They like to dance. They fit together. So a dependent is going to fit nicely with another one of these more nefarious structures.
Right. Goodness. We have one more.
We do. Tell me about it, Doc Fish.
Okay. Obsessive-Compulsive personality. Okay. Not OCD. We're talking about the personality. We're going to put them at medium risk. So they are all about details. They need rigidity, rules. They can be workaholics. But the personality piece is that not only are they that for themselves, but they're going to place those expectations onto other people around them.
Sure.
They might be like a drill sergeant, a supervisor, like an internal investigator of like organizations, right? Like they are going to make sure that whatever expectations they hold are also out in the people around them. So they're likely to be in a position of authority. I think an important detail about them is that they are so rigid and need that control because they're actually repressing their socially inappropriate desires, whatever that is. It could just be anger. That is the key.
Right. Because you wouldn't think on the surface that this type would be medium risk. They seem like they'd be low risk. You know, they just want their clock straight. They want everyone else to have it perfect and the details in line. But the fact that they're repressing these desires and even converting them into quote unquote socially acceptable things, that puts them medium at medium. So tell me more about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's one flavor of this obsessive compulsive personality that is dangerous. Part of the defenses that this type uses is called reaction formation. So that means like converting undesired impulses into the equal or opposite.
Wow.
Equal and opposite. My favorite example, a little boy is bullying a little girl because he likes her, but not on a conscious level, right? It's subconscious. He's not going to own that he likes her. That's not a thing. He's repressing that socially inappropriate desire and going after her.
Right. Socially inappropriate in quotes.
Right.
Because if he's 5,
exactly.
Ew, girls have cooties. So that's what makes it socially inappropriate. So he's converting it.
Which is super cute unless we grow up into adults. And Milan calls this the puritanical subtype. So they have moral or righteous anger, but they repress it. It becomes out of control. They can't handle it. And so then they start destroying others. It could be in the name of something moral. It could be like a violent protest. It's going to be like abrasively violent. Could even be like a terroristic act. They're going to kill others.
In the name of something moral, something deeply believed.
Suicide bombers, I would be apt to put them in this category. Like it's a belief. They have a belief. They're holding a moral, a value. They think that their anger is righteous, which is all fine until we then destroy others and ourselves.
Wow. I would think that some of those who go into like police work, there may be some that do so because they are maybe repressing.
Oh, sure.
Like what if they're repressing like aggressive or the desire to kill, hold a gun, have that power. And then, but once you put that suit on, then it's okay. So it's converting that.
Right.
Is that a possibility?
I think so. I think so. And it's not on a conscious level. It's not like they're thinking like, I want to have this power and I actually want to harm someone.
That's too easy.
Right. Of course. They're converting it into people are not following the rules and they need to follow the rules and I have to step up and make them. But really, perhaps they're the ones that don't want to follow the rules.
Would a vigilante also fall into this category? Like I need to clean up the place?
That would make sense. I think so. They can have paranoid features too, which I think with the vigilante piece, if it's like the world's dangerous, I have to rescue. But by rescuing, they're also destroying.
Yikes. Anything that has the paranoid, sadistic features, antisocial, that's where we get into trouble.
Unfortunately. So we got through the DSM.
We covered a lot of ground, as always. But man, when we get into the personality pathology, the psychopathology, geez, there's so much. It sounds like the biggest takeaways from this are the antisocial. If someone is already committing crimes, going against the norm, they don't care about social violations. If there's high narcissism, they're in it for themselves, for their own glory, for power. If there's sadistic traits at all, if they want to hurt others and they receive some type of jollies from hurting others, that's a problem. If there's paranoid features, like feeling like the world is out to get you, paranoid personality, not paranoia, that's something different. Right. Also a different risk level, but that feeling like the world is out to get you and you have to be on guard and everything and everyone is a threat, that is also a high risk. So looking back over history of different people who committed horrific things, most likely we can place them in one of these personality categories.
Or multiple.
Because we're complicated and personalities are like gobstoppers, right? So what's at the core may not be what's on the outer layer.
It's dark. It's dark.
It's very dark. And we also learned that we are all capable of darkness and horrific things, given the right environment, given the right stressors, given the right kind of group think or culture or need to obey authority. Like we can go with the crowd.
So we're all capable of, I guess, good and bad.
That's right. Because we can do beautiful things too. We can help one another and be really great. But we can also be really vile and destructive.
Unfortunately.
All right. I think it's time to land the plane for today. So I just want to thank you for joining us today, and do join us next time as we dive deeper into personality disorders, structures, and personality types. Be well, be kind, and we'll see you next time on the Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.